It's time for the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It's me, your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko on Friday, breaking things down. Steelers-Ravens, going to be a big one. But Brian's been working on something about what's Kenny Pickett's doing to avoid the turnovers and how it's been a big part of what the Steelers have done. Can they keep it up, though? We'll see in a minute here, right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with my friend and guest, Brian Batko, here on the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. We're breaking things down. Steelers-Ravens week, always big. As always, on this show is brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No extra downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian, you were in the locker room when I believe, I don't mean to put words, when Kenny Pickett was talking about his connection with Matt Canada, right?
Yes.
When you were there was, could you hear the entire city of Pittsburgh screaming, "No, Kenny, don't say anything good about Matt"?
No, I mean, it's not just lip service. I don't think it's necessarily something that means Canada is tied to the hip with Pickett. I think it's as simple as, this game's about relationships. He did recruit him when he was at Pitt. Not only that, Chris, I mean, that's something that everybody knows. I observed personally firsthand back at Kenny's pro day in March before he was even drafted by the Steelers. He or his family spent a decent amount of time with Matt Canada there at the Steelers in Pitt indoor practice facility. So at that point, maybe they're both kind of feeling each other out. Maybe they're really just catching up. There was a whole lot of stuff that still had to happen before he went to the Steelers at number 20, but they were clearly reacquainting themselves with somebody that they knew well, that they believed in from a player/coach standpoint. And yeah, I don't know what you expect him to say at this point about the guy that he works closely with on a weekly basis. So, I wasn't surprised to hear Kenny say that. I also think that, I think a lot of times when you would argue for an offensive coordinator to stay somewhere for stability with a rookie quarterback, I don't know that Kenny Pickett is that type of player. I think the volume of offense and defense that he has studied to this point in his career, everybody knows 5 years at Pitt, it was a revolving door at times of coordinators. He's not the type of guy that I think you're going to screw up his progress or his trajectory if you were to make a change at some point down the line. Like, I just don't think that's a concern with somebody like Kenny Pickett, who has this much experience already under his belt, the way that it would be if you were breaking in somebody who was not a longtime starter in college or had not played in a pro system, something along those lines.
Now, I've been a staunch defender of saying do not do that in the middle of the season, but I've also been very right, like not in the middle of a rookie season. You don't do that to him. But at the end of the season, if you think you got a better guy waiting somewhere, go get him. I think it's all for that. But I think it's just interesting that that Kenny Pickett was, did have some positive things to say there. But you have a piece that you've been working on for the Post-Gazette that goes into his ability to, or how he's improved in not turning the ball over. What are some of the things that you've seen him do right as far as protecting the football and keeping drives alive for the Steelers?
Yeah, I think with Kenny, I mean, it's not perfect. They're on a 2-game win streak, but they still haven't been scoring a ton of points. And we know that the point total against the Bengals a few weeks ago was a little bit inflated by that final drive. So I still think that, he's leaving some throws out there. He's not always picking the right spots to be aggressive, but that's kind of this team's MO this season. I mean, they whether it was Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, they wanted to play more of a ball control style of offense, let the defense do its thing and get out of games, whether they win by 1 or by 21. So I don't necessarily know how much of that is his own struggles versus he is walking the company line here with what the philosophy is for the 2022 Steelers. So that's where I think what you're seeing from him that's encouraging is the growth in the decision-making. Those first few games where he was throwing a lot of picks and he was making some bad decisions, that to me I was like, this is not the Kenny Pickett that I thought we were going to get. So
Right.
I was surprised by that at the time. And now I'm not so surprised that he's ironing out some of those deficiencies. Knock on wood, of course. Maybe I just jinxed him into 4 picks this week against a Ravens defense that has 11 of them on the season. So they are ball hawks in Baltimore, just what you would expect from John Harbaugh's crew. But, it's just a lot of film study behind the scenes, kind of crunching tape, communicating with the coaching staff that Kenny's putting in right now. And, none of that's out of the ordinary, I guess, for an NFL quarterback, and especially a young one. But the thing that it tells me about Kenny Pickett, why the progress here, even against the incremental progress against some lesser defenses, let's be honest, it's encouraging because if Kenny Pickett doesn't succeed in the NFL, it's not going to be because he didn't put the time in, or he didn't understand the playbook, or he can't, go through his progressions against NFL defenses. It's going to be a physical thing for him, I think, if he doesn't succeed at this level. So you're seeing all that you want to as far as the off the field stuff. And I think so far through this little run of 4 games with no interceptions, you are seeing it translate to on the field, which obviously is the only thing that matters.
No, I feel you on that. And like you're seeing that on field. I think it's something that resonates with what you said that I've always felt about Kenny Pickett. You're not going to see this guy not study or not work hard when the cameras are off. That's who he is. He's about preparation. And that's why I think that's a big reason why the Steelers wanted him. They wanted a guy who'd come to every game preparing as if it's about to be his best game ever, or like he needs to make it his best game ever, even when it's not. I think that's where Kenny Pickett has always been a guy. That's what he's done at Pitt. He comes prepared, whether he just had a great week or a terrible week the week before. He's coming in steady. I think that's a big part of it. And like you said, this is a Ravens secondary that's really going to test him. Marlon Humphrey is playing a lot better this year than he was last year, and I think that's going to be a serious challenge that they face this year that they're going to have to get over the hump on. And but I'll be interested to see how well, if Deontay Johnson, he sat out on Thursday's practice. We'll see if he practices on Friday. But is he able to play? Because if they do, if Marlon Humphrey goes on Deontay Johnson, that means George Pickens probably gets matched up with Marcus Peters, who's given up 5 touchdowns this year, which is 5th most in the NFL among cornerbacks. This might be a chance for Kenny Pickett to take some shots, but like you said, they still got safeties like Chuck Clark. Kyle Hamilton has played well for them this year. I'm going to be very intrigued by how he attacks this Ravens secondary.
And Marcus Williams has 3 picks for the Ravens. They went out and got him this offseason. So, yeah, it's a defense that is going to throw a lot at Kenny Pickett. I tweeted this stat out Thursday. John Harbaugh is 19-6 as the Ravens head coach against rookie quarterbacks. Fun fact, one of the people that beat him as a rookie was actually Mitch Trubisky. So not necessarily advocating for Trubisky to get a celeb shot in this one, but that's not a coincidental stat. And, I think I would have to look it up, but Mike Tomlin has a similarly gaudy record against rookies, I believe. I mean, that's usually a sign of good defensive coaching. You're going to do kind of exactly what it takes to catch a rookie off guard. We know the Ravens are known for a lot of exotic looks, disguises on the back end. They haven't been blitzing, I don't think, as much this year, but Kenny Pickett's been good against the blitz. So, it's the chess match within the game, right? He has seen more defenses, obviously, than he had seen at the college level, but it's still 8 games of exposure to NFL secondaries and coverage schemes. So he's still somewhat in his infancy as far as that goes. And, we know the Ravens are going to cook up, their recipe for, trying to throw off these rookies who are still working through the progressions. They beat Joe Burrow when he was a rookie. They've had success against a lot of guys over the years under John Harbaugh. So now you add on to it kind of what we were talking about earlier. If you're Pickett, do you just simply throw away from Marlon Humphrey? Well, what if he's on the right side and George Pickens is on the right side? Do you feel like you need to funnel the ball to 14? You don't really have many other weapons beyond your top 2 receivers and Pat Freiermuth in the passing game. So, and you want to run the ball. It's Steelers Ravens. It's going to be played in a phone booth to some degree, right? So, that's what's going to be curious to watch. I think it's going to be a slugfest, but that could play into Kenny Pickett's hands right now, the way he's been taking care of the ball.
We're going to talk about that phone booth because the Steelers need to keep the Ravens in a phone booth with no Lamar Jackson playing most likely in this game. So how they do that against a rushing offense that ranks even higher than the Atlanta Falcons, who started to give the Steelers problems in the second half of that game last week. We'll talk about that in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice if the holidays were stress-free? A hot tub, a swim spa, or a sauna from Valley Pool and Spa can help you feel like it is. Relax and soak in a hot tub or swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa before the snow flies. Refresh and rejuvenate in a thin layer sauna that is sure to melt your stress away faster than the Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and saunas at valleypoolspa.com. That's valleypoolspa.com. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We are of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And it's time to talk some Steelers defense. Brian, the Steelers defense was able to kind of recover and stay alive in that second half. They needed a holding call that Malik Reed was able to draw on what would have been a touchdown if the call wasn't made. And it was a legit call, but still they were getting bullied in the fourth quarter by the Falcons rushing offense. Even though Lamar Jackson is not here, the Ravens over time, even when the Ravens have been like a bad team and the Steelers have been a good team, they found ways to stretch the Steelers out and run the football. And I can't help but think that danger is still lurking there for the Steelers with this defense, with the way that they looked late in last week's game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one saving grace here is I do think that Cordero Patterson is probably a more talented ball carrier than anybody the Ravens have right now in their backfield. With Lamar out, Gus Edwards, he's played well against the Steelers. He's
tough.
Yeah, he had 130 yards against them in that 2019 regular season finale in the rain. Granted, that was a Steelers team that they were beleaguered by the end of that season. Of course, they had a hopeless offense with Duck Hodges leading the way that day in rainy Baltimore. But, even the next time they played each other, I think Gus Edwards had like 87 yards and a touchdown or something. So something about his physical running style. He's broken too many tackles to the Steelers' liking in recent years against them. Kenyon Drake, I don't know if he still has much in the tank. I believe J.K. Dobbins is still going to be on IR for this one. So that's where I get a little bit, none of these guys are Cordero Patterson. You saw how slippery he was on that touchdown run that came back. And it's just, we've been talking about this all year on this show, Chris, like the margin of error for the Steelers and for about 28 other teams right now in the NFL is slim week in and week out. You've got like 5 or 6 good teams at the top. You've got 5 or 6 doormats at the bottom, and everybody else in the middle. If Arthur Millette gets called for DPI, we're sitting here. We're not talking about a Steelers team on a win streak. Maybe we could be talking about a pretty bad season-ending loss in Atlanta. So that's just where it's going to come down to the playmaking. Mike Tomlin said it Tuesday. Hallmark of December football, I think, is more than anything who makes the plays that turns these tight games. For the Steelers, there's been a lot of that over the years. A missed tackle here is what leads to a 50-yard run and you're done. But you wrap somebody up here, you keep them at bay. Now you don't get that game-changing score against you. So that's what it's going to come down to in this one. Tackling is going to be key. Tyler Huntley, struggled throwing the ball against the Steelers last year, but rushed for 72 yards on 12 carries. So you can't let him extend plays and kind of get you out of what you want to do. So big game, I think more so for the front 7 than the secondary in this one. And, I guess you can throw whoever's playing slot corner into that 7. But, it's going to be a game that I think is knockdown, drag out, which, again, should be a boost for a Steelers defense that, aside from the occasional lapse here and there, has been playing pretty well since that Bengals loss.
Yeah, I think that they need to kind of keep it up. I look at what they've been able to do when they've done things right, when they've been able to. I think one thing that they've been able to get is their interior guys have been healthy and they've been able to kind of keep the linebackers clean.
Yeah,
You've
Larry
seen
Ogunjobi might have been his best game yet as a Steeler in Atlanta. He looked powerful, was throwing
mm,
people around. He hasn't practiced yet this week because of a toe injury, but maybe just managing him. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little concerned about, TJ Watt downgraded from limited to out of practice entirely on Thursday with those ribs that are giving him trouble. Let's see what happens on Friday. But obviously, if he doesn't go, that's a problem.
that is a problem. And I mean, I'd even say that's as big of a problem for the Steelers as Lamar Jackson not being out is for the Ravens, but maybe not as much because TJ hasn't been at his best. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, Brian. There were some run plays against the Colts and the Falcons where he wasn't getting double teamed. He was just losing. And I was like, man, he looks very limited. It looks like he's still dealing with injuries. If it is indeed his ribs, as the Steelers have detailed, it makes you wonder, should they kind of just shut it down for him to protect him long term? Because they need him. Like, whereas granted, he'd be huge, and even his presence at 60% on the field would be a boost for the Steelers. But at some point, you do wonder, are you jeopardizing him long term? Do you sense that approach is anywhere around the Steelers right now?
Not really. I mean, maybe you're seeing it to some degree in practice where normally TJ is a guy who, he wants to go all out at all times, but they have been kind of resting him a little bit more throughout the week. Maybe Lyle Collins was onto something, the Bengals tackle who, pretty much talked his talk after that game and said that TJ was whining to the refs more than he was, winning one-on-ones against him on the edge. But we know he was coming back from injury, in that one. He got banged up, I think, on the final or second to last play in Indy on Monday night. So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot going on with him right now. It hasn't been encouraging, the production or lack thereof, but I think it'd be a hard sell for him to really pull back the reins when you are creeping, however hopelessly, into the playoff picture. I just can't imagine he would go for that, especially since, and this shouldn't be a factor in someone's long-term health, but they're not getting a whole lot out of the number 3. I mean, Malik Reed to me has been a disappointment, in that since that trade on cutdown day. He didn't give up hardly anything to get him, but they keep kind of chasing this third pass rusher that they had early on last season with Melvin Ingram, and you're just not getting a huge, you're getting a pretty big drop off, it feels like, when he gets in there. So maybe DeMarvin Leal can continue working his way back to full health into the rotation. But for right now, I almost think a struggling TJ Watt, there's a better chance that he's going to break out than anybody else behind him.
I kind of feel that way, and it kind of reinforces the idea that they might need to reinvest into that position this offseason, whether in the draft or free agency. It's time to get to the picks, though. We'll do that in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers, listen up. If you're a Steelers fan, you want to support them in their push to try to make the back end of the playoffs here, you can show your support by going and getting some black and gold gear from Yinzers in the Berg. Where can you find Yinzers in the Berg? They got 2 shops in the Strip District that you can go to at any point in time, and their merchandise is ridiculous. They got Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, Pitt, anything Pittsburgh sports, they've got it. So go check out Yinzers in the Berg right now to get all of your Pittsburgh sports apparel. If you can't go to the Strip District, you can go online to yinzerspgh.com, where they have a growing list of merchandise that's growing every single day. So get more gear at yinzerspgh.com. Again, that's yinzerspgh.com for Yinzers in the Berg, the ultimate place for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Brian, Steelers-Ravens matchup here. What's the biggest thing the Steelers have to achieve in this game to get the win?
I think it is providing support for Kenny Pickett on both sides of the ball. I mean, I think on paper, the Ravens have the edge in a lot of spots right now. Maybe not quarterback with Tyler Huntley in there, but still, he's more experienced at the NFL level than Kenny Pickett is. And he's a guy who did pull out a win Sunday against Denver. So when I say support Pickett, I mean, I think the offense needs to continue doing what it's been doing lately, running the ball well, keeping it out of harm's way in terms of, you're not backed up with 3rd and 12, 3rd and 14, where Kenny has to decide, okay, do I just dump this down and punt, or do I try to take a shot here and maybe risk that turnover that can change the momentum of this? So, stay ahead of schedule with him and don't let Tyler Huntley stay in rhythm and ahead of schedule. You know what I mean? So I think if you force Huntley to be the guy who has to drop back and pick you apart, well, now you can be the opportunistic defense in this one rather than that flipping on its head and having Kenny Pickett in a tough spot at home against a really good defense.
I feel you on that. And I think the one thing that they should feel comfortable doing this game, especially because the Ravens don't have the receivers, load up the box. Put the investment.
Who's going to hurt you other than Mark Andrews?
Exactly. And you could put a big body on him. You could have Miles Jack bump him off the line and Terrell Edmonds run with him down the field. But let your corners live on islands. You know what? Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, whoever's outside, Fakella Witherspoon, who cares? Whoever's out there, just don't get beat here, because you got a quarterback that's the backup. You got receivers that are not that dynamic. And then let Minkah Fitzpatrick lurk and do what he does to figure out when it is. But if you force the Ravens to so many 3rd and longs, you're going to get more and more opportunities for your defense to be aggressive. But to get there, I do agree with you. Steelers offense has to show up. They have to take what's there, and they have to give the Steelers a lead to defend. If they allow this to be a game where the Ravens have a slim lead or the Steelers are only up a field goal and we're going into the 4th quarter, I think you're playing right into the Ravens' hands of maybe their run game breaking out and then kind of taking over the game the way we saw the Patriots do early in the season, the way we were starting to see the Falcons do just last week. So all those things are on the table for me for the big concerns. But I do think the Steelers are in a position where they can kind of force these things to happen. Brian, give me your final score and who wins, and what do you think plays? What do you think? How do you think where do you think the big turning point comes in this game?
Well, yeah, and the other thing too we haven't mentioned that probably always should get a little bit of action when you talk Steelers Ravens. Justin Tucker, he's not going to miss any big kicks.
He's not,
with the game in the balance. I mean, he's good everywhere, but he's really good here in Pittsburgh, surprisingly. I mean, it's one of the toughest places to kick in the league, but not for him. He's broken Steelers fans' hearts many a times here at Acrisure Stadium. So, decided edge for the Ravens whenever they play against anybody, and it's a 3.6-point razor-thin game. They've always got that guy on their side. Almost won it a couple weeks ago against the Jaguars. When all else failed them, the defense let Trevor Lawrence go down the field. Still, Justin Tucker almost saved the day. So it's basically once they get past midfield, they're going to get 3 out of it. So
yep.
With that in mind, I do think that the Huntley factor really has me thinking Steelers in this game. Lamar just gives you such a higher ceiling. The Steelers defense has been done in by the elite quarterbacks for the most part this year. I mean, other than Zach Wilson and Mac Jones, that was early on in the season when they were going through some things after TJ Watt's injury. Since then, they've been a lot more buttoned up, of course, except when it comes to playing against guys like Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. Tyler Huntley ain't those guys. I'm going to say Kenny Pickett continues to protect the ball. Maybe his streak ends, but does just enough for the offense to squeeze one out here. I'll go Steelers 20, Ravens 15. Heck of a lot of field goals again, just like it was against the Falcons.
I think that's really interesting. I got 23-16 Steelers, but I'm like you. I think that Tyler Huntley plays a big factor into this. The Steelers needed to win one of these Ravens games if they wanted to hope to either get a winning record and or get to the playoffs. And I think that they at least get this win because of the situation the Ravens are. The Ravens also just aren't playing good football. On top of even when Lamar Jackson was healthy, they lost to the Jaguars. They almost lost to the Broncos last week. They've got to find a way to turn it around. I don't think they do so on the road this week, but that might be different when these two teams meet up later this season in Baltimore. But there you have it. Both Brian and I picked the Pittsburgh Steelers to win here in the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll also both be there at Acrisure Stadium, 1 p.m. this Sunday. It's going to be a fun time. Steelers fans, stay tuned. We're going to have also all the post-game shows. You can catch the post-game reaction with Paul Zeiss and Adam Bittner right here on the Post-Gazette's podcast platform, either on all our listening platforms or on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of the daily content that comes out from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. From Chris Carter and Brian Batko, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.